Okay, good. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at our Chapter 2 quiz here. Okay. And so here we're saying which of the following funds all use current financial resources measurement focus. That's our governmental funds, right? And so we start to look. You can see that A is the answer because all, three of those, debt service fund, special revenue fund, capital project fund, are all governmental funds, right? You look at B, internal service fund is not a governmental fund, therefore it doesn't use a current financial resource measurement focus, it uses economic resources, right? Choice C, debt service fund, investment trust fund is a fiduciary fund, it therefore uses what? Economic resources? Okay, only the governmental fund use our current financial resource measurement focus. So D is the wrong answer because of what? Because the pension fund is listed there. Is this question too easy? You don't want me to ask questions like this on your exam, do you? Is it too easy?
Of course not.
Huh?
Of course not.
Okay. Well, I'll look for some harder ones there. Okay? All right, number 2. I'm just kidding. Pretty much this is the nature, at least from chapter 2. Okay, these quizzes are what? Representative of what I'm going to be asking you on the actual exam, right? Okay. All right, number 2. Which of the following funds of Chessie City would be consolidated to form the governmental activity column in the government-wide statements? And when we have our governmental activities, we take what? We take our governmental funds, our general fund, special revenue fund, debt service fund, capital project fund, permanent fund, and our what? Internal service fund, and roll it all into governmental activities, right? The enterprise funds are in the business type activity. How about my fiduciary funds? Not reported at the government-wide level, right? Okay, so we take a look, and general fund, special revenue fund, custodial fund is one of my fiduciary funds. Not only is it not in the governmental activities, it's not even at the government-wide level, right? Okay, then what? General fund, debt service fund, capital project fund, those are all governmental funds, right? Okay, you look at C, they've included the enterprise and the fiduciary funds there. Neither of those are in the governmental activities. Enterprise fund is in the business type activity, but it is not. Fiduciary funds are what? Not reported together. Okay. Number 3, which of the following local government funds uses the accrual basis of accounting? Uh-oh, I forgot to highlight the answer here. What's the answer? Uses the accrual basis. A, the what? Good. The enterprise fund is the only one that uses accrual because all the rest of these are governmental funds, right?
Yep.
They're going to use modified accrual. Good. Which of the following is a measurement focus and basis of accounting for the government-wide statements? And this almost looks like that table I showed you as the summary table. Government-wide uses economic resources, full accrual accounting, right?
Yes.
Okay. Number 5, the measurement focus of the governmental fund accounting is current financial resources measurement focus, modified accrual basis of accounting, right? Do you like that one table that I put the stars on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. Now this question is going to be a little bit harder, okay, than some of those other ones that we saw. And then it's talking about the classifications of fund balance that we talked about, right? And remember that we said our fund balance, we listed in order of how difficult it is to spend. Okay, so we had what? Non-spendable is the most difficult to spend, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, and that means that it is not cash, it is not receivables, meaning it is what? Things like inventory, right? It's the classic example that we used. Inventory is considered non-spendable because you can't spend it like cash. And I give you the silly example in here. If you bought some nutmeg from Costco and you bought too much nutmeg, you bought a 50-pound sack of nutmeg, and you're like, what am I going to do with all this nutmeg? You go over to Safeway and say, trade milk for nutmeg? Yes? And Safeway's going to say, no. You got any cash? You can't spend inventory, right? Okay? So we have non-spendable, but then we had what? Our other categories were all considered spendable, and we had spendable. Raquel, that was the guy that spends all his money.
Yeah.
Okay, and we had what?
Restricted.
We had restricted. Good. Restricted means that what? We had restricted it with some outside entity, like bondholders. We told them we're going to use the money for a county courthouse or something. Okay. Then what? Then we had committed. That meant that the highest decision-making authority in that government had decided, had passed a formal resolution. They voted as to how that money was going to be spent, right? Then what? Then we had assigned, and assigned means that the city managers had decided how to use that money. So even though we give them a pot of money for education, they could decide to use that money for school books, or they could use it to pay the electricity bill because we need to see the school books, don't we? Okay, so the managers of that school district could use that money that was assigned for education, that was, I should say assigned, was allocated for education. They could use that what? They could assign that money to different activities of the education process, right? And then unassigned meant that they had not what? They still have to spend the money on the school district, but at this point they could spend, they haven't decided if they plan to spend it on electricity, school books, or anything, right? So that money's sort of free floating within the whole education budget. Okay? So we look at all that, and they tell us that the total of the general fund is 1 million. What's the number over there, guys? 562,000? 565,000?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now they start telling us different things about that 1,565,000, and they say the budget officer decided to set aside 405,000 for new road maintenance. The county's governing board had previously given her this authority. The budget officer. Just go through. Is the budget officer external to the government? No. Entities outside the government. The budget officer is not outside of the government. Bondholders are outside of the government, right? Creditors. Enabling legislation is outside of the government. So it's not restricted, right? Okay. Is the budget officer the highest decision-making authority in that government? The highest decision-making authority in the government when it comes to spending money is the legislature, right? The Congress, the state legislature, the city council, the school board. Budget officer is not on the school board, right? Okay, so it's not committed. Budget officer, is that like a manager that decides how to use money that they've been given the authority to spend for, say, education? Okay, so I'm looking, that money sounds what? Assigned to me. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract that off the total here, 405,000, because I know that it is not unassigned anymore, right? Okay, so I start out with the total, sort of assuming it's unassigned unless they tell me something else about the amounts included in this total. Okay, then I look and they tell me that unspent restricted. How easy is that? If the money's restricted, is it restricted?
Yeah.
Right? Federal government gives us some money, hey, use it for drug, whatever, rehab, or assuming they're not using it to get people on drugs. So that 75,000 is going to do what? Come out and be reported as restricted, right? Okay, good. How about the county's governing board? Is the governing board the highest decision-making authority in that government?
Yes.
Governing board, okay, passed a what? Formal resolution. That means they voted as to how that money is going to be used. Okay, so that money is what?
Committed.
Good, that money is committed, so I'm going to go ahead and back that off. What's that, 500,000?
Yep.
That's committed?
Mhm.
Okay, good. Now when I look at the choices, they give me what? Unassigned, unassigned, unassigned?
Mhm.
So if you're doing this problem on your test, your first thing would be to do what? Take the amounts that you have already decided belongs to one of the other categories and subtract it off. And does that give you this 585?
Yes.
585,000?
Mhm.
Okay, and at that point, you can stop thinking because there's only one choice that has what? 585, right? But then you can see that they're also telling you what? We have reported the 405,000 as assigned.
Mhm.
Question? Okay. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 7. And before we do that, because we did this last week, let's just jump ourselves back to our statement of activities. I mean, not our statement of activities, our statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance. And right, we had our statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance. And remember, we by analogy compared that to what we do in commercial. With commercial, we have revenues minus expenses. Difference is what? Operating income. And then we keep going down to the non-operating items. We said in government, we take our revenues minus our expenditures, and we don't call it operating income, but it's like operating income. We call it excess or deficiency of revenues over expenditures. If our revenues are more, it's an excess. If our expenditures are more, it's a deficiency. Right? Revenues minus expenditures on a commercial version of the income statement is like what? Is on a commercial version is operating income. Okay, by analogy. And then when we keep going and we have our non-operating items, that's other financing sources and uses are like our non-operating items. Right? What is the one other financing use?
Like when the government gives money, they transfer it to your house.
Transfers out. When the government transfers money out, when one of the funds transfers money out to the other fund, right? So we had the example, I think, that the general fund was giving $30,000 to the capital project fund. Okay, so inside of the general fund, we would debit other financing uses, transfer out 30,000, and we would credit what? Cash, 30,000, because that money is being sent out of the general fund. Okay, and then and I think we were assuming it was being sent over to the capital project fund. In our little example, capital project fund is going to debit cash for 30,000 and credit what? Other
Financial sources.
financing sources. It's good. It's sort of like a non-operating income, but we don't call it that. We call it other financing sources, and credit that for 30,000. Okay, so the one other financing use is what? Transfer out, right? There are two other financing sources, and you already see transfer in is another financing source, right? What's the other financing source? There are two.
Long-term borrowings, like debt, yeah.
Good. Long-term borrowing, right? We don't have bond payable. We don't have long-term note payable. So when we borrow money, yes, we get cash, but we credit what? Other financing sources instead of bond payable, instead of notes payable.
Yeah.
Remember that whole discussion? You can't take this class and decide that you're only going to think about governmental accounting on Tuesdays at 7 o'clock. That is the mistake that a lot of students make. This class is not that hard, but you can't just sit there and, think that every time I'm gonna reteach you every single thing, right? You're gonna have to look back at this stuff, otherwise by the time you get to this quiz, you lose the benefits of us going through this quiz together because you're like, I don't understand anything that's going on in that class. It's because you haven't looked for a while. Okay? So you need to review this stuff periodically, okay? So there's what? One other financing use, transfer out. There are two other financing sources, which you see right here. Proceeds from what? Long-term debt and the transfer in, right? Okay? Okay. So with that as a review then, let's just go ahead and take a look back at the question that we were just looking at. Which of the following does not affect the excess of revenues over expenditures? Well, purchase of capital assets is going to be treated as what? Good. Purchase of capital asset is an expenditure. Revenue minus expenditure is excess of revenue over expenditures, isn't it? Okay. Number two, incurring and paying salaries, that's an expenditure, right?
Yes.
So it is going to affect the excess of revenue over expenditures. Property taxes levied and collected in a year. Remember, we said that property taxes that you pay are revenue to the government, aren't they? So that is going to affect the excess of revenue over expenditures. D, other financing sources and uses, what? They appear down after that excess of revenue over expenditure, that like the operating income number, right? They're down in that like non-operating section. Okay? Okay, good. Number 8. Which of the following would be classified as other financing sources? Well, there's only two. Transfers in and long-term debt financing. Those are the only two other financing sources. Thank you. Transfer what? From the internal service fund. Is money coming in?
Yeah.
Purchase of capital asset is expenditure. Proceeds from the issuance of a 6-month note payable. That was a little tricky. That's not long-term. You need to know that what? Something that is 6 months is not long-term to be able to answer that question, right? If it's short-term borrowing, it's a current liability. It's going to be reported on the balance sheet, isn't it? Right?
Yep.
Do we put liabilities on the balance sheet? Do we put liabilities on the balance sheet?
Yes.
We're not going to mess you up that much. Okay, liabilities go on the balance sheet, and what? A 6-month liability is short-term, right? So it would meet the definition of a current liability. So it would be on the balance sheet, not as part of my other financing sources. Which question am I on? 8. Transfer from the internal service fund. Yeah, that's an other financing source, isn't it? And special items is special item. Don't worry about that. Number 9. Which line item does not appear on the statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance? And I asked this question on the midterm, and half the class misses it. And I'm like, why? The statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance is like the income statement, isn't it?
Yep.
Do you put receivables on your income statement?
No.
Do you put account receivable on the income statement?
No.
Good. Don't make me come back there. If you think that accounts receivable is on the income statement, we're going to have a long talk. Now, my Accounting 100 students want to put cash on the income statement all the time. And they get sad when I look at them like Chucky. Okay? All right, number 10. Which of the following funds would be reported as a fiduciary fund? Fiduciary fund is what? No. Which of the following funds would be reported as a fiduciary fund? On the financial statements, we have what? Fund level, we have governmental funds, we have what? We have proprietary funds, we have fiduciary funds at the fund level, don't we? yes, you're right. At the government-wide level, we consolidate into our governmental activities, our general fund, special revenue fund, debt service fund, capital project fund, permanent fund. Our what? Our internal service fund, the S&C, goes to the governmental activities. The E&C goes to the business type activities. Who are we going to see? Who are we going to see? GRASP, C, KIP. We're going to see KIP, aren't we? KIP is what? Custodial fund, investment trust fund, private purpose trust fund, and the pension trust fund. So which of these is a fiduciary fund? Did I go too fast? KIP is what? Custodial fund, investment trust fund, private purpose trust fund, the pension fund. So which one is a fiduciary fund? Private purpose trust fund. I put 52 stars on that slide. I showed you that slide 79 times. It had what? Had all the fund names, had the mnemonic, right? This question was answered by that slide, right? The modified accrual basis of accounting should be used in which of the following funds? Governmental fund, GRASP, general fund, debt service fund, capital project fund, permanent fund. Same slide answers this question, right? Because that same slide said whether it was current financial resources, measurement focus, modified accrual basis of accounting or not. So the capital project fund is the what? And GRASP is spelled G-R-S-P-P for our purposes. The permanent fund is first or second. The capital project fund is this first or second P in that, right? Okay. Okay, good. Number 2 here, the numbering's messed up. Don't worry about that. Which of the, I took this from the Connect homework. Okay. Which of the following amounts are identified at the year end as restricted? Resources that a city manager decides how to use? That's assigned, isn't it? Okay. A federal grant that is to be used for playground equipment? Yes, that's outside. And you say, wait a minute, the federal government's the government. Yeah, but it's outside of the state or local government to who that money's being given, right? Therefore, they have to use that for the playground, whatever, that money's restricted, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Significant amounts of inventory is going to be non-spendable, isn't it? Okay, remember, restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned are all spendable. Endowment resources that a city must maintain in perpetuity, you know, that's could be restricted. I disagree with this question. Notice how they said no further explanations are available for this problem? Because whoever looked at and decided the answer decided they couldn't figure out why D wasn't the answer, and that's why they said no further explanation available for this problem. Endowment resources say and that have to maintain in perpetuity says that I have to maintain the principal forever, don't I?
Yeah.
Endowment means I have to maintain that principal forever. And they haven't indicated to me on this question where the money came from. It's sounding to me kind of restricted though. It sounds to me like what? Miss Hayward said, here's some money, hold the principal forever, and what? Use the interest to support the park, whatever the silly example was we gave in here. And therefore, that principal is restricted, isn't it? So this is not the best question, okay? The federal grant that is used for playground equipment probably is the most obvious answer, though. So if I'm taking this test, I would have gone with this. If I somehow were to give you a question that had ambiguity like this, I'll probably give you the points back on it. This is not the best question. What were you guys going to say? You were going to say something else about this. You're going to argue why it isn't restricted. I don't know. It's looking kind of restricted to me. I don't know what they're talking about. Why they wouldn't include that one. Number 3, a certain city reports the following information. Based on this information, which of these is a major fund? Okay? Now, the only thing you had to do on this question was you had, it made it a little bit hard, is you had to know to do what? You had to sit here and first realize that you're dealing with only governmental funds, right? General fund, special revenue fund, debt service fund, these are governmental funds, aren't they? Okay, so then I'm going to sit there and I'm going to take the total of the governmental funds, which they tell me is 26,300,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to multiply that number by what?
10%.
By 10%. Okay, if you came in a little bit late, we were covering this before you came in. That gives me what? 2,000,000 what? 630,000? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Then I take the total of the governmental funds and the enterprise funds. So you had to know to be able to answer this question. Then I apply the 5% test there, don't I?
Yes.
51,250,000 times 0.05 gives me what? God made calculators to calculate numbers like this.
2,562,500.
2,562,500, you say?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So now I start to look and I see, well, which of these funds, and they're using assets, they only give me one line item. They could have given me several to consider. They only gave me the assets to consider. So the general fund, and I don't even need to worry about the general fund because we already said general fund is automatically a major fund, right? So now I start to look at the other. How about the library fund? Library fund is what? Is passing the 10% test, isn't it? I'll put L here for the library. It's passing the 10% test. Is it passing the 5% test?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Library fund passed both tests, so it is a major fund, isn't it? Got to pass both tests? Okay. Okay, good. How about the debt service fund? Debt service fund is not passing the 10% test. It's out. Got to pass both tests, and it didn't even pass the first one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thus, general fund and library fund is the answer here. Question?
It has to be greater than?
Greater than or equal to. Greater than or equal to 10%, 5%. Hello? I know you get it. What'd you guys do? Drink too much Kool-Aid at the Meet the Firms? Whatever that stuff was they were handing out? The Marriott shows up with bubble drinks. Come on. They were pretty aggressive, and the Marriott really wanted to hire here, and they have a program. It's a program. It's an accounting, associates program where they move you up, and what they do is they sign you to one of their facilities. Like in San Jose, they've got these really nice hotels and stuff, and they sign you, you work in there, and they train you in all aspects of the hotel and stuff. What I didn't like about what they were saying when Amy Chang and I met with them, they said, well, the accounting students, they really don't have the personality, and so they don't really fit in the hospitality, And I'm like, who? What? Which accounting students? Not ours. Because the accounting students that are here, they're going to the firms, and the firms are not going to be hiring people that don't have their person. So who are you talking about? So then Amy was kind of like kicking me under the table, like, John, I won't beat anybody up over here. Okay, so I didn't like some of the things that they were saying, but it's not a bad gig. The other thing that pissed me off about them is then I sent them some of my students that I knew had good communication skills, and they didn't respond. I'm like, okay, so you just want to whine, okay? But they were at Meet the Firms today, and they did have these drinks that looked like they really wanted to impress us. So, was there vodka in those? No? All right. Huh? Unfortunately, because they looked like they were just set for vodka. Okay. Let's take a look at, no, at least that's the way I look at it. How does the GASB recommend governments report budgetary information? We saw the budgetary comparison schedule, actual to budgeted, final budget, right? Okay, and so that was part of our required supplemental information. That's it. No, one more. Number 13. This is that table, isn't it? That I put the stars on? Okay, and so we've got what? For our governmental funds, modified accrual. For our proprietary funds, full accrual. For our fiduciary funds, full accrual, right? I could add another column here, which would be our government-wide. It would also be full accrual, right? Okay, good. That's it. Okay, so we're going to have an easy class tonight, guys. That's it. That finishes chapter 2. Couple things. You need to, if you're behind, you need to be looking at these lectures. You need to be looking at these slides. You need to be going through the quiz for chapter 1 and 2. Okay, you really need to do that, because what's going to start to happen next time is we're going to start to dig into journal entries. And we're going to start talking about revenue recognition, and it gets a little steep in there. Okay, so if you're sitting here and you're still struggling with some of the basics, you're going to not know these basics. Not that you need to know them to answer those other questions, but you're going to start to make a mountain for yourself, where right now you can kind of keep this stuff pretty easy, and we're going to start to build in terms of the complexity. We're going to do chapter 4A next time, revenue recognition. Chapter 4B after that, that's going to be our expenditure side of our transactions. We're literally going to be learning journal entries for all of that, and that's going to then put us on the path toward midterm 1. Okay, so don't sleep on this easy stuff, guys. Look back at it, but know that the bar is being raised now, okay? All right, guys, I will see you next week. From now on, our class is in this room. Okay?